You know, for half a century, one word has pretty much defined American political scandals: Watergate. It's the scandal that brought down a president. But what's really wild is that this huge constitutional crisis, it didn't start with some massive bombshell. Nope, it all started with a simple piece of tape on a door.
And that's the big question, right? I mean, America has seen its fair share of political scandals before and since. So what was it about this one? What made Watergate so different that it forced the first, and so far only, presidential resignation in the nation's history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. So, where does it all start? Well, it begins with something the White House press secretary just brushed off as a third-rate burglary. Just a minor crime, right? But that little crime, it was the thread that would end up unraveling an entire presidency.
Okay, so picture the scene. It's late, June 17th, 1972. Around 1 a.m., a security guard, Frank Wills, he's doing his rounds and finds a door latch taped open. Kinda weird, so he takes it off. But then, not even an hour later, he comes back and the door's been retaped. Now that's not just weird, that's suspicious. So he calls the cops. And what do they find? 5 guys, all dressed in business suits, inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters, loaded up with electronic surveillance gear. Not your typical burglars.
So who were these guys in suits? Well, they definitely weren't your average cat burglars. Turns out they were connected to a super-secret White House unit with a pretty memorable name. The Plumbers. Yep, the Plumbers. Officially, their job was to plug leaks of classified info. But unofficially, their real job was to carry out political dirty tricks and espionage for the White House, using, any means necessary.
And this right here is the absolute key to understanding Watergate. Look, the break-in itself, it was a crime, for sure, a serious one. But it wasn't the real scandal. The real scandal, the thing that blew everything up, was what happened next, the massive, illegal conspiracy to cover it all up.
Let's be really clear about this because it's so important. You have 2 scandals here. On one hand, you've got the break-in, a bungled, illegal spying mission. Bad stuff. But on the other hand, you have the cover-up, and that was a whole different beast. We're talking about a huge, sprawling conspiracy that involved lying under oath, destroying evidence, paying off criminals, and it was all being directed from the highest office in the land, the Oval Office.
I mean, look at what they were doing. They were shredding incriminating documents from White House safes. They were paying out over $180 grand in hush money to keep the burglars quiet. They even tried to get the CIA to tell the FBI to back off the investigation, using this bogus excuse of national security. This wasn't just, oops, we made a mistake, let's hide it. No, this was an active criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice, plain and simple.
And you know what? For a while, the cover-up actually seemed to be working. Nixon went on to win re-election in one of the biggest landslides in American history. It looked like they got away with it. But then investigators stumbled onto the one thing, the one piece of evidence that you couldn't shred, you couldn't bribe, and you couldn't silence.
And here it is, the bombshell moment. In July of 1973, a White House aide named Alexander Butterfield casually reveals during testimony that, oh yeah, by the way, President Nixon had a secret taping system that recorded every single conversation in the Oval Office. Just think about that. All of a sudden, there's a perfect word-for-word record of every secret meeting, every whispered plan about the cover-up.
And on those tapes was a mystery that became legendary. 18.5 minutes. That's it. An 18.5-minute gap in a super important conversation between Nixon and his chief of staff just days after the burglary. It was just gone. Poof. Erased.
So what was the official explanation? Oh, you're going to love this. The White House claimed that Nixon's loyal secretary, Rosemary Woods, accidentally wiped the tape. How? Well, apparently, she kept her foot on the recording machine's pedal while stretching way over to answer the phone. The press immediately called it the Rosemary stretch. And, well, let's just say nobody was buying it. Not for a second.
But in the end, that 18.5-minute gap didn't even matter. Why? Because of this, the smoking gun tape. This recording, from just 6 days after the break-in, caught President Nixon red-handed. You can literally hear him ordering his chief of staff to get the CIA to shut down the FBI's investigation. There it was, clear as day, the smoking gun. Undeniable proof that he was in on the cover-up from the very beginning.
And once that tape went public, it was over, just like that. The whole house of cards came tumbling down. The constitutional crisis that had been simmering for 2 long years finally boiled over. The end came fast. It was like a series of dominoes falling. First, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, orders Nixon to hand over all the tapes. Then, the House Judiciary Committee approves articles of impeachment, and, importantly, with support from both parties. Then, that smoking gun tape is released to the public, and that's the final nail in the coffin. His own party's support in Congress just vanished overnight. Facing certain impeachment and removal, he had nowhere left to go.
It's incredible to think that just a few months earlier, President Nixon had looked the American people in the eye and defiantly said, "I am not a crook." Well, the tapes told a very, very different story.
But the story doesn't quite end there. There's one last really controversial twist. Just 1 month after Nixon resigned, his successor, President Gerald Ford, gave him a full and unconditional pardon. Ford argued it was necessary to help the nation heal and move on. But for a lot of people, it was a gut punch. It meant the man at the very center of it all would never, ever face criminal charges.
So, after all these years, why do we still talk about Watergate? Why does it still matter? Because its legacy completely changed the way Americans look at their own government. So let's circle back to our original question. What made this one so different? Well, think about it. Teapot Dome? That was corruption in the cabinet, but the president wasn't directly part of the cover-up. Iran-Contra? You could argue that was about foreign policy, not just covering up a domestic crime. The Lewinsky affair? That started as a private matter. Watergate was unique because it was about the President of the United States using the power of his office to commit a crime and then leading a criminal conspiracy to cover it up, all for his own political survival.
And the shockwaves from Watergate are still felt today. It led to a whole bunch of new laws about government ethics and presidential records. It absolutely shattered the public's trust in government, creating a cynicism that, let's be honest, is still with us. It also turned investigative journalists into heroes and inspired a whole new generation of them. And, of course, it gave us the suffix "gate." Now, every single scandal, no matter how big or small, gets a "gate" tacked on to the end of it.
But maybe the most chilling part of the whole legacy comes from the man himself, Richard Nixon. Years after he resigned, he was in an interview and said this, trying to defend what he did. This single sentence gets to the absolute core of the crisis, the terrifying idea that if the president does something, it's not illegal. It was a direct challenge to the very foundation of American democracy.
See, in the end, Watergate was never really about a third-rate burglary. It was about a test of the entire American system. It was a battle over abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and that one fundamental question. Is anyone, even the president, above the law? And now, 50 years later, you have to ask yourself, is that question still being answered?